And good evening. Welcome to this first edition of Campaign Chat Live for April 2020. It's April 7th, Monday night, 7 o'clock. I am Michael Ross, candidate for State House of Representatives in District 68. Excuse me. Oh, that's the excitement of live streaming right there, folks. As I was saying, I'm Michael Ross, candidate for State House of Representatives in House District 68 that runs along the Highway 75 corridor from Berry Hill and West Tulsa down through Tulsa Hills into Jenks and Glenpool. And I am so glad to spend a little bit of time with you this evening to kind of talk about some of the events of the day. And to let you know, first and foremost, I'm excited to announce that I got out there and dropped my packet in the mail so that this week I am officially a filed candidate for House of Representatives. So thank you all so much for your encouragement thus far and for your support in the future. It's always exciting to kind of make things official. So thank you so much for encouraging me this far, and I'm excited to say that that's for real. Something else I'm excited to talk about with you guys today is our state of education. So April 6th is the day that the State Department of Education has asked that schools resume curriculum, but without reopening buildings. We're on a distance learning model, and the thing is that for a lot of us, we've not done that before as our exclusive avenue for education. And I have to say, as a classroom teacher, today was something that I feel good about. I got a lesson out to my students and communicated with them through our Google Classroom and kind of set the tone for how we're going to do education in the coming weeks. And we even had a video message from my school's principal who did morning announcements for us. So I feel good about how that went, and I feel good as a parent. My daughter is a student at Jenks West Intermediate, and her teachers have done a remarkable job of getting her back in the swing of things. They did a morning meeting through Google Hangouts and Meet this morning, and my daughter was so excited to see her teachers and her friends. So there's a lot to feel good about. These are unprecedented times, but there's a lot to feel good about as far as the state of Oklahoma's public education system and how we're going to get our kids through May. So with that said, let's shift gears. Today was the first time that the legislature has gavelled in since mid-March. In fact, since about the last time I saw my students in person. And what that means is that there's a bit of emergency legislation to address in terms of the governor's abilities to address the COVID-19 crisis. It really wasn't that long ago. In fact, it was less than a month ago that this was the public face of our governor. He was bragging about being out in a crowded venue with his family on a Friday night when, the threat of COVID had shown itself to be something quite real. So that's that's kind of where we started as far as the executive branch's attitude toward this. And we're still kind of dragging our feet on some things, but it's good to see some progress. There was bipartisan work done by the leadership in both the House and the Senate. The bad news is that there is going to be a revenue failure this year of over $300 million, and some of the legislation that was needed to deal with that got hung up, so that will be hammered out in the coming days. But at this point, we need to talk about healthcare. We need to talk about the way in which we're going to deal with the present challenge and the way in which we're going to care for Oklahomans in the future. Let's take a look at some numbers real quick. So we know now that as of today is Monday, April 7th, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,300 Oklahomans have been reported as testing positive for COVID 19. We also know that our data is far from perfect. Quite frankly, there are just not enough tests being administered. Those numbers have been going up, but it's still an imperfect picture of where we are at. Of course, the two hot spots are Oklahoma City Metro and the Tulsa Metro. Those are the two densest population centers in the state, and it's kind of frightening to look at the way in which this disease is kind of cutting across large swaths of Oklahomans. We have everyone from, I think the numbers said that we have patients ranging between infants all the way up to the elderly. The median age of people affected is, I think, 56 is the latest number. But that said, we're seeing young, healthy people who are afflicted with this. In fact, many of you probably saw the news this morning that a Quick Trip employee in his 20s passed away as a result of COVID-19. So this is a serious disease, and it's one that we're only starting to get a clearer picture of how it's impacting us. We've had 51 deaths due to COVID-19 as of about noon today, and that's a 10% increase in deaths since just yesterday. So there's projection that we have not yet seen our numbers peak. Be prepared that things are going to be rough for a while and probably will be darker before they get better. One of the things that I need to call to your attention with regard to the COVID 19 situation, but also in a larger sense, the office for which I am running, is that what we are seeing is the bare minimum coming out of the office of the representative for District 68. If you look through his communications with the public, which thus far are basically limited to his personal Facebook, he does not share much through other channels. He tends to just post a daily briefing that actually is copy and paste word for word from a briefing that is sent out to members of the House. I actually did some comparison with other House members. The teacher plagiarism checker in me felt the need to go back and see just how, if there was any commentary being provided or any insight, and there was none. What we're seeing is instead almost kind of a shirking of responsibility. I understand that a single representative can't turn the tide of things, but if you're elected to represent people, you are elected to advocate for them, to speak up for your constituency. And he's not doing that. In fact, the only time I've seen him make a direct statement was when a constituent last Friday, April 3rd, yes, last Friday posted on his wall on Facebook asking him to take a more aggressive stance, asking that the governor issue a blanket stay home order. And he kind of brushed it off. This is his statement. He said the governor took unprecedented action on April 2nd to declare an expanded health emergency for the entire state, invoking an act that gives him expanded authority and increases the state government's ability to respond to COVID-19. I'm not aware of this statute ever being used before and speaks to the seriousness of the situation. Okay, so what does that even mean? Well, the governor has been pushing what he's referring to as safer at home as opposed to stay at home. The only group that he has outright said needs to stay home is senior citizens and those with compromised immune systems. That's well and good, but the fact is that we know from the last couple of months of data that you can have anybody struck down by by this, and you can have anybody carrying it. We know that we have people who are what are called asymptomatic carriers, which means that they don't manifest the symptoms while they're actually spreading the virus. Okay, so what does that look like in the grand scheme of things? Well, when you look at how many states have put into place a a proper safer at home, which would be a stay at home order, there are 41 states that have done so. In fact, here's a look at a map. These are the 9 states that presently have not implemented a proper safer at home and instead have been kind of letting things fall back onto municipalities as opposed to the state taking a position. Arkansas, Iowa, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, South Carolina, Wyoming, Utah, and the great state of Oklahoma. What this means is it means that we've let leadership fall back onto our municipal leaders without any sort of actual, meaningful leadership coming from the state. You look at the largest municipalities in Oklahoma. You look at Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and you see that both mayors Holt and Bynum, as well as I believe the first mayor in the state to issue a stay-home order was the mayor of Norman. Recently, Mayor Lee of Jenks has issued a stay-at-home order. You see municipalities taking action, but until we actually take a meaningful step to flatten the curve, we're going to be fighting an uphill battle. So I would pose that it's up to all of our elected officials, even the ones who aren't in necessarily an executive position, to advocate for us, to speak up and say, look, we need to take action to save lives. Otherwise, it's almost kind of like, we've got the mayor from Jaws running the show. The beaches may be open, but do we really want to be residents of Shark City? Moving on, let's shift gears over to answering a question that came up in last week's Twitter feed. And again, you'll notice I don't have my Twitter running right now, but you can change that if you'd like to tweet at Ross4OK, or if you'd like to use the hashtag HD68. That should pop up. So remember, this is an interactive program, and also remember that when this goes up on other platforms, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, that the conversation can continue through comments. So last week I had the question come up. I think it was Dan Wade asked if I could explain the difference between the traditional Medicaid expansion and the block grant-based Medicaid expansion that the governor is pushing for, what he has termed SoonerCare 2.0. So tonight we're going to take a little more in-depth look into that. So what does it mean to implement these two types of Medicaid expansion? First of all, we need to note that the governor has to announce a date on which Oklahomans can vote on State Question 802 by April 14th, which is next week. The fact is that the petition for State Question 802, which would allow Oklahomans to vote on a traditional Medicaid expansion, had the largest number of signatures ever gathered for a single question in the history of the state of Oklahoma. And the governor's been dragging his feet. He does not seem interested in putting it on a ballot. The deadline is coming up. So that's going to be something that's going to have to be clarified within the next 7 days. If State Question 802 passes, it preempts anything that the governor proposes as far as SoonerCare 2.0, block grants, anything like that. So, first of all, what did he propose when he submitted his proposal to the federal level? First off, his proposal begins with July 1st of this year, when, for the remainder of the calendar year and going into next year, all Oklahomans who qualify would be given, there would be a full expansion. However, that would only be good for about a year, at which point in July of 2021, SoonerCare 2.0 would begin scaling back that expansion. They would actually begin removing people from eligibility. In fact, what we've seen from the state's own numbers is that 5% fewer Oklahomans would be covered under SoonerCare 2.0 than with traditional expansion. And what that means is about 7,500 Oklahomans would be kicked off of Medicaid when July of 2021 came around. Here's what that looks like. And you'll notice that these two numbers are running they're running in parallel. The blue line is how many Oklahomans would be added over the coming 5 years with traditional expansion, and you see that it's just over 150,000. And if we were to go to the waiver model, SoonerCare 2.0, that you've got a sizable gap there. You've got, again, almost 7,500 Oklahomans who are not going to be able to take advantage of that. As we dig in a little bit deeper, one of the things that we find is that Stitt's proposal would implement a work requirement. Now, work requirements have been incredibly controversial, and in fact, in a number of states that have tried to implement them, they've been found to be unconstitutional. Governor Stitt's proposal, especially during this time where you've got a clear healthcare crisis, not just in our state, but in our country, Governor Stitt's proposal was actually called out directly by the Washington Post, who said that putting this work requirement on expansion was Dickensian. It's pretty bad when the image that's being called up is that of, the orphan Oliver asking, please, sir, may I have some more? And it's worth noting that work requirements are vocally opposed by the American Medical Association. The fact is, many of our Oklahomans who are going to qualify for Medicaid expansion are people for whom the idea of putting them to work because of health reasons, because of physical impairments, because of a variety of reasons, it's just not feasible. You can't rightfully expect some of these folks to be able to hold down a job that meets that work requirement. It's kind of cruel. So what you end up with is a workforce that has to choose between being sick in one category or being sick in another. So do keep that in mind. Another thing is that under SoonerCare 2.0, many Oklahomans would be required to pay a symbolic premium and in some cases a copay. That premium is something like $10, which may not sound like much, but when you think about our friends and neighbors who are living paycheck to paycheck and for whom that $10 might be the difference between having a tank of gas to get to work that week or not, or being able to keep the lights on, or putting food on the table, that $10 is a sizable chunk of change there. So keep that in mind, that there's not a whole lot of data that backs up the idea that a symbolic premium actually incentivizes work, and what you run the risk of instead is penalizing people who are struggling to get by. 3 things of note. Oh, and I had some graphics that were going to pop up and they aren't there, so I apologize for that. 3 things of note with regard to the concept of block grants in terms of Medicaid. First of all, what a block grant represents is that the federal government would pay in a set amount of money annually to the state for the entire covered population. That is all the state would get. From there, that amount would be fixed, and if you had people applying and actually being eligible for Medicaid, we wouldn't be able to get more money for them until that cycle came around again. So you end up with situations where the state may actually be liable for more medical costs than were initially expected, and the state has to absorb those costs. Excuse me. So keep that in mind that the block grant on paper may sound like a sensible option for us, but really it could end up being kind of a Trojan horse. This is a topic that definitely deserves much more scrutiny and much more discussion. And I welcome more questions with regard to traditional Medicaid expansion versus SoonerCare 2.0. I personally endorse traditional Medicaid expansion. I signed the petition for State Question 802. I will vote yes on that. I don't believe that Representative Sims has ever staked a position on Medicaid expansion, and I would be curious to hear him take a position one way or the other. So do keep that in mind that so far I am the one candidate in this race who is willing to stick my neck out there. So with that said, some topics that we want to keep an eye on going forward and as we look ahead to next week. First of all, do keep an eye on those COVID-19 numbers. That's definitely story one of the day. Um, take take precautions, even if you live in a community where you've not been told to shelter in place. I think it was Mayor Bynum who said this. It was either Mayor Bynum or Mayor Holt said that if you have to ask the question, "Gosh, can I leave the house to go do this?" You probably shouldn't be doing it. So if it's picking up groceries, if it's going and picking up prescriptions, if it's essential business like that, then no, that's not something that you really need to be out doing. If it's, gosh, you just have to go wander around Costco for an hour, maybe that's not the right decision. I was glad to see the city finally shut down even spaces like the golf course. I live adjacent to Paige Belcher, as I think most of you know. Um, this is not a time where even that is prudent. Take good care. If at all possible, wear a mask, wear gloves. PPE is the rules of the road here. I do want to say thank you to all of our healthcare professionals who are working so tirelessly to tend to our communities, both locally and statewide, nationally and internationally. Thank you for all that you do, and know that we have your back. That the people of your community support you, and we are deeply, deeply appreciative. So, with all that said, oh, the third thing that I would it's been a bit of a day. The second thing to watch for is definitely going to be that revenue failure. We've got to pass a budget before the legislature gavels out for the year, so that's going to be a story to watch. It's very encouraging that the legislation that passed today, some of it does direct that funds can be taken out of the rainy day fund to provide necessary services. That's very, very heartening. But again, that's something that is going to impact us not just now, but going into the future. Finally, one last thing to watch for. Remember that this week is candidate filing, and know that until 5 p.m. on Friday, no race is set in stone, and there are lots of good candidates out there that are well worth your attention. And I hope that if you are a House District 68 resident, I hope that I have earned your support, or may take the steps needed to earn your support. If you're not an HD 68 resident, be sure and take a look at who is filing to run in your neck of the woods, because, like I said, there's a great slate of candidates coming up, and part of how you get business done is by electing locally, by looking at the people who are running to represent your community. This is a presidential election year, and I know that that kind of sucks the air out of the room as far as talking about elections. But remember that a lot of the change that you want to see happen is change that can be affected by people uh, just like you and me, people who are getting involved in their community and trying to make a difference. So, with all that said, remember to like and share this video. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. It's all Ross4OK. Remember, I have a YouTube channel for those of you who are YouTube users. And know that I appreciate you spending this half hour with me tonight, and wish you a pleasant week ahead, and encourage you to stay healthy and stay safe and stay positive. So, with that said, I will see you all next Monday, 7 o'clock, same bat time, same bat channel. Have a great evening.